Well, the Chinese invasion of the European car market is only getting bigger. And this week, it's still this week, BYD, the world's biggest seller of electric cars, just unveiled their latest offering on the European market. And if you ask me, this will be their best selling car, period. Not only because it is offered at a great price, but that will depend on the market you're in, but because it has great specs, at least at brief look on the spec sheet. What you see next to me is the BYD Dolphin Surf. It is a micro car, it's an A-segment car under 4 meters long, and it aims at attacking cars like the Hyundai Inster, or the Citroën EC3, or the very old and defunct Dacia Spring, which I think might be a bit out of its depth in this comparison. But if you want to stretch things out a bit, you could consider the Renault 5 a rival for this car as well. What BYD managed to achieve, though, is a great price with great specs, as you're about to see. So what is this car next to me? It is their proposition in the A segment, right? So micro cars, cars for the inner cities, cars that are under 4 meters long and are aimed at providing great everyday mobility with a very low cost. So that's why I think this will be a very popular choice over here in Europe. Now, in terms of design, well, some say, as Clarkson would put it, some say this car has been created by the same mind that created the Lamborghini Huracan. And to some extent, that is true, because the designer of this car used to work for Audi and Lamborghini, and apparently, according to him, there are some hints on the design of this car that should remind you of the Huracan. And to be honest, the headlamps do remind me of the Huracan, and the color, of course, does the same, as are these very sharp angles everywhere on the car. So yeah, I think you could say it has some of the Huracan DNA. After all, it was designed by the same guy, but I think comparing it to a Lamborghini would be a bit of a stretch. In more practical terms, this car has a total length of 3 meters 99, but the most important figure here is the wheelbase. Now, if you're looking at this car on other markets where it is sold under the Seagull name, for example, it is a bit shorter, but it has been made longer for the European market to fit more customers and their needs, right? So in other markets it's 3.8 meters long, over here is 399, but the wheelbase is the most important aspect, as I said, 2.5 meters, and that should translate into a lot of room inside. Also on the design front, this color, lime green, should come as standard on every model, right? No matter which version you go for, and there are 3 equipment lines available. There's the base one, which is called Active, there's the intermediate one, Boost, and there's the top one, Comfort. We are driving the Comfort version, which is also, of course, the most expensive, but I think the Boost one will be the one to get, and I'm going to explain why later on. Now, in terms of wheels, we have 16-inch wheels on this car. The Boost version also gets 16-inch wheels, and the base version, the Active model, gets 15-inch wheels. I don't think that's an issue. They are small either way. But there is an interesting thing you should note about this car, even though it's made in China, and we've seen a lot of cars coming over there, especially budget cars, using their own Chinese tires, right? Sailun or Linglong and so on. This one comes with Hankook Ion tires. These are dedicated EV tires, and they are a bit more expensive than any other choice I just mentioned previously. So that's quite interesting. But that's something BYD is able to do, because, I don't know if you know, but BYD is able to build its cars from scratch. They can create in-house absolutely every part of their cars. As a matter of fact, the press release of this car made it especially obvious to point out that only the rubber blades on the wipers and the tires I just mentioned earlier are bought from another company. Otherwise, every single thing you see here is made by BYD, right? From the sheet metal to the glass to the windows to the technology to the motor to the battery, every single thing you see on this car is made by BYD. That is incredibly impressive, and that is why BYD, like other companies in China, is able to offer their cars at such a low price compared to its rivals. Not only that, but they can control the entire production process, and they can create software that works flawlessly, kind of like Apple does, right? With its iOS. That's why it's so appreciated by its customers. That's going to be an issue for a lot of European car makers. Now, in terms of coming back to the car, the rear end looks pretty good as well. It has a light bar going from side to side, right? In terms of lighting technology, base models, the base model and the intermediate one get halogen headlights. All of them get DRLs with LED technology, but only the top version gets an automatic high beam with LED lights. Now, if you actually need that, well, considering this car is specifically created for inner city use, I don't think you'll ever get to use the high beam, the automatic high beam, right, during your journeys. But if you want to buy this car and you have some trips to do, you know, outside the city limits, maybe this should be something you would take into consideration. That said, let's talk about the technical side of things. Now, on the technical side of things, as I mentioned, every single item on this car is built in-house by BYD. There are 3 models available, as I mentioned: Active, Boost, and Comfort. Let's talk about them from the tech side of things. Active, it's the cheapest, and of course it has the least impressive specs. It comes with an electric motor able of delivering around 88 horsepower and 175 Newton meters of torque. It is mounted on the front axle. It's a front wheel drive car, and it is hooked up on an LFP 30 kilowatt hour net battery. Now, in terms of battery technology, you probably already know that BYD patented its blade technology, which means the batteries are using LFP technology. Basically, they have less probability to ignite. And this blade technology claims that they are safe even in case they get impaled, and they won't blow up or start a huge fire, which is very comforting, of course. Now, this blade technology is also supposed to be a lot more compact. So that's what every single BYD car uses, and it's so good that even Tesla started borrowing blade batteries from BYD, which is quite interesting. So that's the base version, right? 30 kilowatt hours might be a bit too little, but for daily commutes, it might just be enough. Charging is done on this version with the 30 kilowatt hour battery at up to 65 kilowatts. It should take about half an hour to recharge it. And you can also use 11 kilowatt charging on AC. Also, all cars come with vehicle to load at up to 3.3 kilowatts, which is pretty good. I mean, every single one of them comes with this technology, and that should prove useful in certain situations. Now, going up to the Boost version, it uses the same electric motor, so it's also 88 horsepower, but it upgrades the battery, which is 43 kilowatts in this case. Also blade technology, also LFP, but since it's bigger, it allows it to recharge faster, or at least at a faster pace with more power, up to 85 kilowatts at maximum. Since this car has a bigger battery, it's also a bit heavier, so it will be slower from 0 to 100, whereas the first version, the active version, will do it in 11.1 seconds. This one is 1 second slower. And then we have the Comfort version, which is the one we're driving today and reviewing, which is the most powerful one with 156 horsepower and 220 Newton meters of torque. That's class leading, by the way. And it has the same battery as the Boost version, 43 kilowatt hours. And it is faster, 9.1 seconds overall. All cars have the same top speed of 150 kilometers an hour. And the charging power on this version, since it has the same battery as the Boost version, is the same 85 kilowatts tops. So a charging time of about 30 minutes. Now, all cars come with a 6-year warranty for the entire car and 8 years of warranty for the batteries and the electric motor, but up to 200 kilometers in total, not 160 as most cars are getting these days. In terms of suspension, we have a classic McPherson setup up front and a torsion beam at the back. And another thing I want to point out is the fact that this car has brake discs at the back. I know some people are very curious about that. Yes, this one comes with brake discs, not with drums at the back. Let's begin our interior review by talking about the boot. Since you're going to use this car around town, you're not going to need a huge boot, but extra space never hurts. So check this out. We have 308 liters of storage over here in the back. According to BYD, this is a class-leading boot. What you see here is not the entire storage, because we also have some additional space under the floor. Actually, quite a lot of it under the floor. The one thing some people might have an issue with is the fact that the rear bench is split 50-50. But I think that's okay. In this price point, that's okay. If you fold both of these seats, you get up to over 1,000 liters of space over here in the boot. So let's hop inside. Check out the build quality on this very, very budget car. So this plastic is definitely hard on the wrists, but it is not the hardest I've seen in this segment. It's in line with most rivals, especially the Inster, which this car will be rivaling with a lot. This is better quality, but it's still plastic, and this is a soft touch area made of something that resembles Alcantara and leather at the same time, somehow, right? This is the window regulator, and this is additional storage space over here in the door. And this is the synthetic leather you get as standard on all models, and I have to say it feels very premium for cars in this space. You don't have an armrest in the middle, and of course you only have two seats over here in the back, but both of them have ISOFIX anchor points, which is pretty good for people with small children. Let's hop inside. We have a flat floor, which is yet another good thing about this car, and this is the amount of room I am left with the driver's seat adjusted in my comfortable driving position. I'm 6 feet tall, and this is how a 6 feet tall person would fit in the back. There's definitely enough room, and I love the fact that the front seats have their backs covered in this synthetic leather as well. This feels very premium for a car in this price point. Let's check out the headroom. I am grazing the roof liner, right? Just barely grazing, which is something I can't say about the Hyundai Inster. It seems like the Inster is a bit more spacious. That also goes for the Leapmotor T03. So that's something you might want to keep in mind depending on what kind of people you want to carry in the back. I don't know. I also like the fact that we have this extra storage space over here in the center console, if you will, under the armrest, and this is what the dashboard of the BYD Dolphin Surf looks like. Quite nice, isn't it? Let's check out the front cabin. So in terms of build quality, we have similar plastic over here, but somehow it feels a bit nicer to the touch. Also soft touch materials over here, buttons for the window regulators, of course, and this is the door opener. Look at this, this is huge. You could impale someone with that, and that's the storage space. As I said, the comfort version comes with these seats. I mean, all models come with these seats, which have the headrest integrated into the backrest, but on the comfort version you have electrically adjustable seats. That's pretty good. Hopping inside, this is the steering wheel, flat at the bottom, looks good, has physical buttons on it, thank God, and it's wrapped in leather as well, so that's pretty good. Let's start the car, and when you do that, check out the screen, because BYD models have this trick. We even have this button on the steering wheel. They can switch from portrait mode to landscape mode, and that's true even on this base version, this base model, right? The Dolphin Surf is not a expensive car by any means. So this is the 10.1-inch screen you get for the infotainment system. It's quite easy to use. It's very responsive. It works great. The resolution and the contrast could be better, but then I've gotten used to OLED screens in other cars. You can't really ask for OLED technology in such a low price car. We have this shortcut menu over here at the top, right? You can turn off and on various features, and if you slide from down to upwards, you can switch between different recently used apps. Or if you're in Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, if you slide up, you get this menu for the climate system. But you don't really have to do that, because on BYD models, you have this trick, right? If you do this, you adjust the temperature. And if you do this, you adjust the ventilation speed with 3 fingers. That's pretty good. That's something I want to see all car manufacturers implementing. It's such an easy way to adjust your temperature and everything in between. These are the most important buttons inside this cabin, right? So this is basically your gear shift lever, if you will, your gear selector. This is the parking button. You have reverse, neutral, and drive. Now, park is on the side. You might think it's an issue, but it's actually not, because whenever you turn off the car automatically switches into park, so that's not an issue. This allows you to control the driving modes. You can see them over here. And this is the 7-inch screen that comes as standard on all models. Not exactly very detailed and not exactly brimming with information, but it's enough for most needs. This is the button for traction control, button for auto hold, which is something a lot of cars don't have. This is the hazard light button, and every single one works like this. You slide it upwards or downwards, right? It's as simple as that. This is the button for the AC, this is the button for the ventilation and for defogging, and this is the volume button. Very easy and simple to use. Not much to talk about here, but I do like the fact that we have an infrared camera over here. It's something a lot of Chinese manufacturers are implementing these days. They are mandated by the Euro NCAP. If you want to get a 5-star rating at the Euro NCAP testing cycle, you need an infrared camera to supervise your face. And a lot of Chinese companies are using this sort of implementation. So BYD is probably aiming for a very high ranking in Euro NCAP. That would be great, because cars in this segment usually don't do that great. I actually like this material over here. It's very soft to the touch. This is hard plastic, but that's okay. We have the wireless charging pad over here, which comes only on the comfort models. But if you don't get comfort models, you do get these 2 adapters over here, these 2 charging ports, USB-C and USB-A, and a lot of space under this console, where you also have 2 cup holders. Overall, not a bad place to sit in. Well, I had a couple of surprises during the last few days, and this car actually impressed me quite a lot. I didn't expect that, to be completely honest. First of all, I just came from recharging it, because I did my usual range test with it, and of course I drained the battery almost completely. I was left with about 20%. So I was curious to see just how fast the charging process goes, and to test the maximum charging power. And to my surprise, according to BYD, the Dolphin Surf can charge at up to 85 kilowatts, right? It uses an LFP battery, it's a blade battery, we all know that. However, when I hooked it up to a charging station, the power went up instantly to 87 kilowatts, which is quite impressive. I didn't see that coming. I only charged it to just above 50%, I don't need any more. And the average charging power was over 60 kilowatts. So it kept that going, it kept going at 87 kilowatts for the first 10%, 15%. It started dropping, and at about 56%, it was at 53 kilowatts. So it was pretty good. I think you will achieve the quoted 30-minute charging time from 10 to 80% rather easily, of course. So yeah, I was impressed. It is very rare to see electric cars charging faster than the claimed figure posted by the car manufacturer. But I did notice that on a number of Chinese cars recently. On Leapmotor C10, I tested it recently, and it was also performing brilliantly in this regard. Now this one, so yeah, pretty good. The second surprise I had was just how refined the ride is in this car. Now, as I mentioned before, this is a very simple setup. It's a McPherson up front and torsion beam at the back, but it performs brilliantly. It was and is a very refined ride. It soaks up the bumps brilliantly. Even though it's a simple setup, it performs very well in a number of situations. Admittedly, we do have very small wheels on this car, so that could be why some bumps are soaked up rather easily, but I think the suspension is incredibly quiet. You don't hear a peep out of it, even when going over sharp edges, right? So that's the area where most suspension setups are upset, but not in this car, and that is definitely great news for prospective buyers. Now, what I have to mention is the fact that, yes, some people will compare this to the Spring. I don't think that's a fair comparison. The Spring is actually quite good on the suspension as well, but the Spring is falling behind quite a lot in terms of the technology you get on it. But I think the closest rival to this car is the Hyundai Inster. And the Inster does have some problems in terms of suspension. I tested it about 3 times already, and what I noticed is that the front suspension is a bit louder than this one, right? So you do hear a couple of weird noises coming into the cabin, especially going over sharp edges. I don't know why, maybe they'll fix it. Truth be told, I tested the car 3 times, but it was the exact same car every single time. And yes, I did notice those noises. Now, what I don't see the Inster doing, though, is the brilliancy of the voice-controlled assistant inside the car. So this one has a very good one. Check it out. Hey, BYD.
Hi there.
I'm cold.
Got it. Increasing the temperature by 1 level.
Increase the temperature more.
Okay, I've raised the temperature by 1 level.
So yeah, it works pretty good in my book. I tested it a couple of times and I can't say I'm disappointed. It's a very well set up system, and from what I could gather, it seems like the Chinese companies are very invested in creating very good personal assistants and very good assistants on board, very good AI for vocal commands, right? So even though this area has a couple of downsides, especially in the climate control, because that's where the Inster will have the upper hand. We're used in Europe to having, temperature degrees in the climate control menu, right? You don't get that here. This is basically a manual, if you will, a manual AC system. You can adjust the temperature in general, not precisely like we like, in 0.5 degrees increases. You can just adjust it, hotter or colder, whatever you like. You can adjust the ventilation, but you don't have an auto function, and you don't have precise degrees shown over here in the menu, if you catch my drift. That's where the Inster will probably have the upper hand for European customers, and it will feel more familiar. But the system does work, it's just not that refined yet. Another thing that Inster does better is energy recuperation. This car only has 2 degrees of energy recuperation under regenerative braking, so you can set it to standard or enhanced. Whereas on the Inster, you have paddles behind the wheel, which allow you to adjust it in 3 or 4 steps. I don't really remember right now. And you also have an automatic mode. Basically, you hold one paddle and it will enter an automatic regeneration mode, in which you also have one pedal driving. This car doesn't have one pedal driving, so if that upsets you, well, it is what it is. However, what I noticed is the fact that this car is actually more efficient than the Inster. So I'm guessing you will be interested in how efficient this car is and what's the real range. Well, around town, I did 100 kilometers with it, and the average energy consumption was 11.2 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers covered. And that is pretty good. That is 2 kilowatts less than on the Hyundai Inster, the top version, the luxury version with 113 horsepower. I did not see that coming. That means with the battery we have on this car, the 43 kilowatt hour battery, you could do about 380 kilometers with a full charge. That's damn good. I mean, for most people, considering we usually have like 10 or 20 miles to cover during our daily routines, that should be enough for 2 weeks. So you should be able to charge this car only once every half a month, sort of speak, right? So that is pretty good in my book. I really did not see that coming. The truth be told, it is a bit warmer today than it was when I tested the Inster. It's about 3 degrees warmer, and that might have played a part. This car is also brand new. It was delivered to me with 30 kilometers on the clock, so it is brand new. Maybe over the longer term, it will change in the way, I don't know, maybe the numbers will change on the long run once you add more to the odometer. But I am impressed by the efficiency of this car, and that makes it very cheap to run as well. You know, it's not just about the range, it's about the cost you end up paying to use an electric car. And it does have 11 kilowatt AC charging. 22 would have been ideal, but it's okay, and we do have vehicle to load on every single model, so that's pretty good. Another thing I like about it is how easy it is to drive around town. The steering is nice and easy. You don't need heavy feedback or anything like that. The brake is predictable. It's very easy to modulate. We do have a button over here which turns on the 360-degree cameras, which is pretty damn good. I wish every single car had it, but yeah, it's very useful when you're trying to park, and the car is incredibly narrow, so you'll find a parking space rather easily. It's not just about the length of the car, it's also about the width, because we've been complaining, I don't know about you, but I've been complaining a lot about the fact that parking spaces seem to get smaller every year, and the cars seem to get bigger. So at one point, something's got to give, right? But with this car, I noticed that I can park it just about anywhere, and it's small, and it's compact, and it fits everywhere. So that's the definite plus in my book. That's why this is a city car, right? And it has a turning radius of under 10 meters, 9.8 meters, which is brilliant because it makes it incredibly easy to drive around town and to park. Of course, it's very maneuverable, and coupled with this suspension, it's easy to use. I would have preferred a bit more adjustment on the seats. Now, they feel great, they are electrically adjustable, but you don't have lumbar adjustment, and I would have liked a bit more adjustment in that area, but I think that will depend on your configuration, right? So now let's hop outside the city and talk about the way this car handles on the highway, even though it was created for the city. On the highway, you will probably rarely see these cars on the highway because they're not exactly made for such environments. As I mentioned probably too many times already, this is a car made for inner city use. But since I am doing my usual range test with every single electric car, I thought to try it out on the highway as well. Maybe some people will use it, maybe not for long trips, but for short commutes every day. So, what's it like to drive on the highway? Well, the first surprise I had was just how quiet it is. And I'm not kidding. Now, normally when you see a very budget car, a small car like this one, you probably think, well, you know what? They probably didn't invest that much in sound deadening because it is meant to be used around town first and foremost. Well, you'd be wrong. I used my decibel meter to measure the sound in this car, and the average was 79 decibels, which is quieter than the Inster, quieter than the Spring, quieter than a number of cars, and just a bit louder than the BMW 7 Series. Yes, it is that quiet. They chose the only parts that they don't make very carefully, I think, and they chose the Hankook Ion tires specifically to reduce tire noise inside the cabin, and they did a great choice. Also, the wiper blades are incredibly quiet as well. You don't even hear them whenever you're washing your windscreen. So great choices, very good sound deadening inside this car, no complaints whatsoever. Most of the wind noise you're gonna hear is from the huge windscreen and from the side mirrors, but not from the wheel wells, where other cars in this segment have huge issues, by the way. The second surprise was just how zippy this car is, even at highway speed. So I'm gonna slow down to 80 kilometers an hour right now. And I'm gonna show you just how fast this car accelerates from 80 to 130, right? 80 kilometers an hour, let's go. 90, 100, 110, 120, 130, and we're uphill, right? If you switch into sport mode, it's going to be even faster. Yes, not exaggeratedly fast, not incredibly faster, but noticeably faster either way. So yeah, you will be able to do some overtaking on the highway rather easily. However, you won't get that far because the energy consumption in this car on the highway is absolutely crazy. So I tested it at 130 kilometers an hour for 50 kilometers, and the average was 25 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers covered. That's almost as much as the Sea Lion 7 and almost as much as the Kia EV6 GT. So yeah, it is thirstier on the highway than the Inster, for example, where the Inster was averaging 22 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers covered. Either way, none of these cars are meant to be used on the highway too often though, but I said I'd give it a try. Maybe some people will buy it as a city car, and occasionally they might need to do a commute for 20-30 kilometers, you know, who knows, maybe that's going to be the case. So I wanted to give you some numbers. At 25 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers covered, that should give you a range of about, let's say, 170 kilometers with the big battery. The small battery will probably get less, or maybe 100 kilometers of range on the highway. So you might want to keep that in mind. With all of this said, what's the takeaway? Let's pull over and talk about the conclusions about this car. So, what's the takeaway regarding the BYD Dolphin Surf? To be honest, this is a great city car, no matter how you look at it. So it has very good energy consumption, more than decent range, especially in this configuration with 380 kilometers of range. I think that should be enough for most people. I think it drives great. I think it has a great suspension. There are some things that need to be refined, like the climate control, like the resolution of the screens, like lumbar support and so on. No car is perfect, but overall I think this is one of the best buys in this space right now, alongside the Hyundai Inster and alongside the Leapmotor T03. All of them have pros and cons. The T03, for example, is a bit taller and offers more headroom. Interior room seems the same. The Inster has more tech on board, but less power, and so on and so forth. So you can compare them in a number of ways. But overall, I think this is a very good choice for people looking for city cars or maybe short trips around those big cities you live in. And I think it has a great price to performance ratio, and I think the Boost version, the intermediary one, will be the one to look for. Even though if you're thinking about getting a car strictly for inner city use, I think the base active model might be enough for most people with its rather small 30 kilowatt hour battery. If you're only planning to do short trips and you can charge your car at home or at your office, I think that should be enough. You know, you get about 250 kilometers of range out of it, and I don't think you have such a huge daily routine. And as I said, if you can charge it daily, I think that should be great for your needs. But that's just my opinion, and I am incredibly curious to find out what you guys think about it. So let me know in the comment section which one would be your choice, and until next time, don't forget to feed your passions. Ciao.